Welcome, everyone. Tonight we are doing the fourth and last component of our mini-series on the attributes of compassion and principles of faith. We have quite a bit to get through to tonight. So we'll just start with a quick review to put in context what we're going to be doing. Is throughout the whole mini-series we've talked about, there are, in the Torah itself, there are two sets of attributes of compassion. The most known one is the 13 principles that were taught to Moshe from Hashem after the golden calf, Shlosh Esrei Midot HaRachamim. And then a lesser noticed one is in Parshat Shalach, after the spies came back. And again, Moshe had to plead for forgiveness for the people. But there he only enunciated nine. We're going to see the importance of this as we continue tonight. And then we've mentioned, but we haven't delved into it, and that's what we're going to do tonight. There was a second series of 13 attributes revealed by the prophet Michah in chapter 7, verses 18 to 20. It's the end of the book of Michah. And that forms the central piece or focus of the Tashlich ceremony that we do on Rosh Hashanah. And that's why it's become so important, because it's a universal custom, as we're going to talk a lot more about Tashlich, but it's a custom to go to a body of water on the first day of Rosh Hashanah if we can. If the first day of Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbat, we do not do this. We wait for the second day. And many people don't know, but you can do Tashlich all the way to Hoshana Rabbah, because it's not everyone lives by a body of water. I'm not talking about a fountain, either a lake or a river or a stream or the ocean, a sea, a mayan, spring. So you have until Hoshana Rabbah. And the central piece are these 13 attributes of compassion from Michah. Now, the Zohar says an amazing thing, because the 13 Midot HaRachamim, God himself taught Moshe. And God, the Midrash says, God said that anytime the Jewish people need compassion, this is the words that you should say. This is the prayer, the formula. And yet in the Zohar says that the 13 attributes of compassion, as revealed by Michah, are on a higher level than even the 13 midot that God revealed in the book of Exodus after the golden calf. So the question is asked, how does that work? It's not what we would expect. And so we can answer, I'm sure there are many other answers, but the two that I saw, researched, was it's pointed out that when the 13 Midot HaRachamim were revealed by God to Moshe, this was after one of the most disastrous sins in all of Jewish history. And so these attributes of compassion are revealed in the context of Israel having done something like very, very, very wrong, and whose ramifications have rippled through the generations. Whereas the attributes that Michah reveals, which we're going to go over in a minute or two, is not in response to Israel doing anything wrong. In fact, the book of Michah has some of the most glorious, elevated prophecies of the future. And so his 13 midot of rachamim, his 13 attributes of compassion, are more coming from a more positive point of view and are future oriented, not so much in response to sins, or particularly the sin of the golden calf. That's one explanation. Another explanation is a very, very important concept that we see throughout Jewish tradition, is that, in a sense, the farther we get from Sinai, the more is revealed of the inner dimensions of the Torah. The outer dimensions, the what's called the revealed Torah, so in a certain sense becomes a bit cloudier. For example, between Shammai and Hillel, there were approximately 6 disagreements. When it got to Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, meaning as the generations continued, those who had the tradition from Hillel, those from Shammai, there were now hundreds of disagreements. And today, it's common knowledge that for any particular question in halacha, you can get many, many different legitimate answers. But as far as the inner dimensions of the Torah, the farther we get from Sinai means the closer we are to Mashiach. And our tradition holds that the closer we get to Mashiach, the more of the inner dimensions of the Torah will be revealed. So here is Michah coming approximately 600 years after Moshe. And now he's revealing, meaning God revealed to Michah these aspects of compassion. We see a further development. And that's why when the tradition of the Zohar was revealing teachings that no one had seen up to then. Same thing with the Arizal. The Arizal was revealing, in a sense, new aspects of the Torah, new perspectives. Same with the Baal Shem Tov. And it continues through the generations. So we can understand that Michah was a mouthpiece for God to reveal even a deeper dimension of midot of rachamim. So I'm going to now read in Hebrew and English. I sent to everyone on the WhatsApp yesterday the same thing I'm going to read. If anyone wants to grab a Tanakh, it's in the Book of Michah, which can be found in what are called the 12 minor prophets. Relatively short book, 7 chapters. And it's the 7th chapter, the 18th to 20th verse, 3 verses. I'll read each verse and then translate it. And this is the centerpiece of Tashlich, which I'll explain in a few minutes, the deeper dimensions of Tashlich, of going to a body of water and symbolically casting our sins. But you'll see why we're reading this, because in the Midot of Rachamim, it mentions this idea of casting our sins into the depths of the sea. It's part of the 13 attributes that Michah reveals, and that's why it's connected to Tashlich, as we'll see in the second sentence. So the first one is, Mi el kamocha nosei avon v'over al pesha l'sherit nachalato lo hechzik la'ad apo ki chafetz chesed hu. Who is a God like you, who forgives iniquity and passes over the transgression of the remnant of his heritage? He does not maintain his anger forever, for he desires loving kindness. That's the first verse. The second verse is, Yashuv Yerachamenu, Yichbosh Avanotenu, U Tashlich. That's the word Tashlich. The Tashlich b'mitzolot yam kol chatotam. He shall return and grant us compassion. He shall hide our iniquities, and you shall cast into the depths of the sea all their sins. Here we're asking God, as it were, to take our sins and cast them in the sea. The ceremony of Tashlich, we symbolically do our own sins. We rid ourselves of our own sins. And the last verse is, Titan emet liYakov, chesed la'Abraham, asher nishbata la'avotenu, miyamei kedem. You shall give the truth of Jacob, the loving kindness of Abraham, which you swore to our forefathers from days of yore. This, I believe, is from the Chabad website on Michah. So those are the three sentences of Tashlich. And I have to say, we have so much to get through tonight. We're not going to delve into the depths of each and every one of these. Everyone is welcome to go online. Just put in the 13 attributes of compassion of the prophet Michah. Many different sites will come up. But I'm just trying to give an overview. And again, because it says, and you shall cast into the depths of the sea all their sins, we can understand very simply why this is recited during Tashlich. I will make a few comments, though, that Rabbi Moshe Cordovero in the mid-1600s, he's known as the Ramak. He lived in Sfat, and I always claim the following, that right after the Ramak passed away at the age of 48, the Arizal came to Tzfat. There are two different versions when he came to Tzfat. One says that he came to Tzfat 6 months before the Ramak passed away, and he sat in the Ramak's yeshiva. The other version is he came on the very day that the Ramak passed away. This I'm not going to go deep into it. Yes, in the mid-1500s, around 550 years ago. If there wouldn't have been a figure called the Arizal, we might have thought of the Ramak in the same way we think of the Arizal. In other words, he's a little bit overshadowed by the Arizal, but his contribution to the mystical tradition was enormous, enormous. He, at the age of 18, this is a separate story, is that there was a rabbi in Sfat, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, who wanted to reinstate the institution of smicha, of giving official ordination to rabbis. With that, after a certain amount of time, a Sanhedrin could have been reestablished. And of course, it would have been a revolutionary step. Unfortunately, the rabbis of Jerusalem were against this idea because it came from Sfat. Let's say maybe there was a little bit of competition between the rabbis of Jerusalem and Sfat. Nonetheless, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav did give smicha to a number of people. Two of them were to Yosef Karo, the compiler and the writer of the Shulchan Aruch, of course, one of the most important law books in Jewish history, and to the Ramak. You know how old the Ramak was when he got smicha? 18 years old. So you can imagine what a genius he was. The The other few people who got smicha were all in the 60s, 70s, 80s. The Ramak was 18 years old. At the age of 20, his brother-in-law, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, began to teach him Kabbalah. He introduced him to Kabbalah. Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz is the composer of Lecha Dodi that we sing every Friday night. That was his brother-in-law. And soon the Ramak had mastered the Kabbalah. He opened the yeshiva, and it was really, in a sense, the first official yeshiva geared for Kabbalah. And then he wrote a masterpiece to this day called Pardes Rimonim, the pomegranate orchard, where he took all the previous Kabbalah up to him and he organized it in a methodical manner. And he took really scores, if not hundreds, of questions about Kabbalah, and he attempted to answer them in a very logical, methodical way. I'm mentioning all of this because one of the books that he wrote is a short book. It's actually part of a much, much bigger book, but it was ultimately printed on its own. It's called Tomer Devorah, the palm tree of Devorah. Because the prophetess Devorah, it says that she would sit under a palm tree and she would judge the people. And in this relatively short book, he takes the 13 midot, or attributes that Michah revealed, and he goes through them one by one, and he explains based on one of the mitzvot in the Torah is to emulate God. It's one of the 613 mitzvot. And the rabbis ask, well, how do we emulate God? And very importantly, the answer, just like God is compassionate, you shall be compassionate. Just like God is gracious, you should be gracious. In other words, whatever attributes we know of God in the Torah and the Tanakh, we should try to emulate. So that's what the Ramak did. And it became a classic work. We simply do not have time to go into it, but he went through each of the 13 attributes that Michah mentioned that we just read. And he explains, first of all, in a sense, how God fulfills that attribute and what we could do as human beings to emulate God in our relations with other people. So even though the Ramak was one of the highest teachers of Kabbalah of the last 1,000 years, this book is relatively philosophical, psychological, and practical. He's not giving over Kabbalistic secrets here. He's actually just taking these attributes and explaining how should a person emulate God in our relations with other peoples. And I have to say, he sets the bar very high, very, very high. And of course, we have to attempt to emulate God in this way. But there's no doubt that, I have no doubt that the Ramak was probably able to do this. But like I said, he set the standard very, very, very high. But that's good. That's good because we want to set the standard high. So that's as much as we could get into Tomer Devorah. I would imagine if it's possible that you could Google and and ask for an English version of Tomer Devorah. I see that Brenda, just put up a link to the book on Amazon. And it's found in every yeshiva, and it's studied extensively. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to, first of all, mention the comparison between the two sets of 13, which again, we can't go into, but if you look online, or better still, if anyone has the art scroll, Machzor for Rosh Hashanah, you'll see that there's an attempt to make a one-to-one correspondence. In other words, in the art scroll, above each of the attributes of Michah, in smaller print, you'll see one of the 13 attributes that God revealed to Moshe. In an attempt to make a one-to-one correspondence. Now, I'll say it's not easy because in a sense, they're two different attempts to explain God's attributes. Nonetheless, you'll see in art scroll, because they wanted to make a point that the importance of both of them are 13. Now, what I want to point out is there's two words that appear in both of them. Actually, there's more than two words. I shouldn't say that. Because you have the root of rachamim in both, of compassion, and you have chesed in both of them. In both of them, 2 times. In other words, in the 13 midot that God taught Moshe, 2 of them have to do with chesed, and the same with the ones of Michah. Here in Michah it says, Ki chafetz chesed hu. God desires chesed. And then he says again, Titen emet liYaakov chesed la'Avram. So in other words, in both sets, chesed appears twice. And in both of them, the word emet, also truth, is mentioned. And the reason that I wanted to mention about emet is because in one of Rav Ginsburg's many books, this is part of a series of 26 volumes called Mivchar Shiurei HaItbonanut, choice classes based on meditation, where Rav Ginsburg makes a correspondence between the 12 months of the year and, I'm going to say 13 months of the year, because he includes a leap month, and the 13 inner dimensions of the Sfirot. As far as I know, no one else has ever attempted to do this, where he makes a correspondence between a month and one of the inner dimensions of the Sfirot. So the reason I mentioned that emet is in both of them, because according to this paradigm from Rav Ginsburg, the Sfira that is connected to the month of Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, and Simchas Torah, is the inner dimension of Yesod, which is emet. And that's why I'm mentioning it, because Rav Ginsburg brings a verse, Rosh Devarcha emet. The beginning of your words are truth. And of course, the beginning, we believe that God created the world from speech. So this idea that the beginning of God's speaking the world into being is coming from the aspect of emet, of truth. And we know that the sages mention that the seal of God is truth. How do we know that? Because the last three words of creation, of Shabbat, is the last letters of bara Elokim la'asot, that God made to do, to rectify. The last letters of those three words spell emet, and therefore the sages said, because that's the end of creation, that God sealed creation with emet. But if you look at the first three words of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim, you'll also get the three letters of emet, but not in their correct order, because this is the beginning of the world of tikkun, which is coming from the broken vessels of the previous world of tohu. So the letters of emet were not in their order, but they're there. By the time we get to the last three words, they're in their proper order. So that is one of the connections to emet. And Rav Ginsburg points out that we have two of the 4 New Years of the year. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the New Year of months. That's why Nisan is called the first of the months. And Rosh Hashanah is the New Year of years, but it's the 7th month. And so Rav Ginsburg points out that the energy or the svira that is connected to Nisan is emunah, faith. And Tishrei is truth. So this is what the prophet Jeremiah said. He lauds Am Yisrael that they followed God with complete faith into the desert, with just the matzah forming on their shoulders, taking whatever they could, and going out into the unknown in complete faith that God is taking us out of Egypt. Tishrei is the energy of emet, that it's the day of judgment. The books are open. The books don't lie. Now we can pray, and we do, that God gets up from his throne of judgment and sits in his throne of compassion. That we most certainly can do. But the energy of Tishrei is emet. Now what's beautiful is, look at the first 2 letters of both faith and truth. Emunah and emet, they're the same letters. Aleph, mem. Emunah, Aleph, mem, emet. Now, one other thing that we want to mention is, now this is an amazing thing. If you remember at the burning bush, when Moshe asked God, when I go back to Egypt and they ask, who sent you? What should I tell them? What's your name that I should tell them? And God said, Ekia Asher Ekia. I will be that I will be. That gematria is 543. This name of God, Ekia Asher Ekia, I will be that I will be, is 543. 543 equals the combination of emet and emunah. When you emet's 441, emunah is 102. 102 and 441 is 543. So here we see the connection between Nisan and Tishrei. They're exactly 180 degrees apart in a circle. Rosh Chodesh Nisan and Rosh Hashanah are right across from each other. So one other thing is that we probably discussed this before. There's what's called Teva Rishon and Teva Sheni. Teva Rishon means our first nature, the nature, our DNA, how we're brought up, the nature and nurture together. And that forms our nature. That forms who we are, how we react to things, how we think about things, what our perspective is. But we're told that our first nature is wonderful. That is who we are. But we're in this world to make ourselves better. We're in this world of rectification. And we all know that in our first natures, we have many, many wonderful things and many things that are not so wonderful. Let's be honest. We have certain tendencies, certain ideas or perspectives or attitudes that over the years we have nurtured and adapted or adopted. But it doesn't mean that that's how we should remain. And so we're told that really Teva Sheni is building on Teva Rishon. It's not throwing Teva Rishon away. It's not trying to squash it. It's just trying to clarify it, improve it, hone it. And so the gematria, that's why I'm bringing this, of Teva Sheni, of our second nature, the nature that we work on. All of Elul, hopefully all of us are working on our Teva Sheni, equals Emet. Teva Sheni equals Emet, equals truth. And that's what we're going for. We're trying to achieve is a better improved Teva Rishon called Teva Sheni. Okay, now let's get to Tashlich. So I want to give over relatively quickly some really beautiful insights into Tashlich. Now, the whole thing of Tashlich is to go to a body of water. That's like the centerpiece. The rabbis could have said, here's the prayer, say it in shul. Say it in your backyard, whatever. No, the important thing is to go to a body of water. So the question is, why? What's the connection of water with Rosh Hashanah and what we're trying to accomplish? So first of all, if we look at water, water in Jewish tradition purifies. We go to a mikvah. That is how we halakhically purify and spiritually purify. We go to a body of water called a mikvah, and that is the purification. So on Rosh Hashanah, of course, we are beginning a 10-day period, the 10 days of repentance, Aseret Yemei Tshuva, where we are looking to purify ourselves, to cleanse ourselves. Another aspect of water is that it flows. That's why we're told that the best body of water to go to is a flowing river or stream. Now, we all know in general how mesmerizing standing by a body of water can be, but especially a flowing water. So on Rosh Hashanah also, along with all the din and the judgment, is we want our lives to flow. We want it to flow like water. And so here we stand at this body of water and we allow ourselves to meditate on the water. We allow ourselves to be taken in the flow of the water, and it actually becomes a prayer. It helps us to be conducive to a prayer of wanting our life to go easy and flowing. Another thing about water is, even though there are individual drops of water, the word for water is only in the plural, mayim. Even if you want to say a drop of water, it's still water is plural, because our experience of water is like, let's say you have 100 apples and you put them in a barrel, put them on your table, whatever it is, and you squish them together as much as you can, it's still going to be 100 apples. You could call it a barrel of apples, but the apples remain independent. I mean, you could squeeze them and get apple juice. That would make them one. But I'm just saying in their natural state. But water is all the drops come together. You can't really distinguish in a body of water. And that's why the tradition is that usually whole congregations go and do Tashlich together. You can do it alone. For sure you can do it alone. But I'm just saying that there's a tradition in most synagogues that everyone tries to go to the same body of water and to do it together. So that's the idea of water. Another thing about water is we call it living waters, Mayim Chaim. Living waters, especially a spring. A spring is considered halakhically living waters, and it takes a part of many, many different Jewish laws about the importance of living waters. So what are we praying for on Rosh Hashanah? Chaim, life. For those who are here Sunday, we actually went over this, but I'll just say it again. We insert this for the 10 days of tshuva. Zachreinu l'chaim, remember us for good. Melech chafetz b'chaim, a king who desires life. Lamancha Elokim, V'kadveinu b'sefer hachaim, and write us in the book of life. Lamancha Elokim chaim, for the sake of the living God. So we're praying for water, and again, water, its nature, it connects us to life and rebirth. So that's another reason. Another one is a very interesting one, is we're told that in ancient days, a Jewish king was coronated by a body of water. The simple reason is why. It gets back to the flowing. So it's actually, it mentioned, I believe, in the Gemara, that why by a body of water? Because we're blessing the king that his kingship should flow like water to his inheritor and to their inheritor. In other words, his kingship should last throughout all the generations. And that is King David. King David until Mashiach comes, Mashiach ben David. That the kings, the legitimate kings, were in the lineage of King David. But there's another, call it mystical reason, is because the gematria of the word melech is 90. And what is the gematria of the word mayim? 90. So it's like, where else would you go to coronate a king than to a body of water? Because they equal each other. There's a connection. There's a deep connection. And so why this ceremony, Tashlich on Rosh Hashanah? Because when you look at the prayers carefully of Rosh Hashanah, even though we relate to it as a day of judgment, a day of tshuva, most of the prayers, in fact, the vast number of prayers are accentuating the coronating God King. If you just look at the simple words of Shachrit Mincha, Marav, Musaf, the whole thing, almost all of the emphasis is coronating the king. And that's why in so many Hasidic congregations, along with the seriousness of the day, Rosh Hashanah is very joyous. The nigunim, the nusach is majestic, but it's also, most of it is very joyous because we're coronating the king. And when we're connected to the king of kings, there's nothing more joyous. And then there's a famous midrash, and there's even more levels, but we'll end at the midrash. There's a midrash that says that when Avram was taking Yitzchak to the Akedah, this was his 10th and final test, the hardest, that the Satan came and created a raging river in their way. And they came to this raging river, and they would not be deterred. And as soon as they, in a sense like Nachshon ben Aminadav, they went forward, it was a mirage. There was no raging river at all. And this midrash is very connected, that right before we blow the shofar, we read a series of verses. And the initial letters, the Rosh Tevot, spell out Kra Satan. Rip up the Satan, the Satan. And so this is connected to this midrash. And so why are we going to a body of water on Rosh Hashanah? It's because I would imagine through the month of Elul and the prayers of Rosh Hashanah, everyone is trying to bring a future vision they see for themselves into reality. And we all know in the previous year, we were confronted with many, many, many different obstacles, every one of us. And in the coming year, inevitably, we will be confronted again with many, many, many obstacles. And so here, the idea of going to a body of water is as if we're saying, just like Avram and Yitzhak could plow through, could dispel the mirage of the obstacle, so can we. So all of these are just beautiful reasons for this ceremony, this ritual called Tashlich. Now, with the little time we have left, I want to do something a little bit different, but it's a very, very important, deep perspective that can accompany us through all of the upcoming holidays, including the last days of Elul. We're still in Elul. We're almost at the 25th of Elul, which is considered the first day of creation. And that is, we want to make a connection now between water and compassion. This whole series has been about compassion. And now I want to, it's like a face. It's a perspective that we can look at from now through Simchas Torah. So let's start, and we're going to do this fairly quickly. For any of you who have my book, Seasons of the Soul. So it's written out in full. And I'll just say, B'li Neder, I will post it on the WhatsApp this coming Thursday. because it's really just a beautiful, beautiful insight that ties all of the holidays together. So let's start quickly. We've already established a number of times that the whole month of Elul is called Chodesh HaRachamim, the month of compassion. So the most simple idea is that we don't wait for Rosh Hashanah to ask God for compassion. We don't wait for Rosh Hashanah to ask God to get up from his throne of judgment and sit on the throne of compassion. And of course, in our prayers now of Slichot, the main component of Slichot is the 13 Midot HaRachamim. But there's a deep hint to the connection with water here. So first of all, we already mentioned that water has the ability in Jewish law to purify. That's the importance of the mikvah. And we looked at the word mayim when we looked at the gematria. Mayim equals 90. Well, the word mayim begins with a mem, has a yud, and then a final mem. So we're told that the first mem has a space. It's not a closed figure. That is bodies of water that flow, or water is fed into them. The closed mem, the final mem, are bodies of water like a mikvah, which begins with a mem, that is as it were, a closed body of water. The yud are the individual drops of water, and when they all come together, make the plurality of water, but the unity as well. And so the secret here is mem is the 13th letter of the alphabet. It's the 13th letter of the alphabet, and it's the major component of the word water, and it's the last letter of the root word for compassion, rachem, rachamim. Rachamim has two mems. So here we see that the imagery of water is starting already in Elul. And also, we mentioned that one of the ways that we refer to the 13 Midot HaRachamim are the 13 parts of the beard. And we said, why the beard? Is because symbolically, the beard is taking from the head, from Keter, Chachma, Bina, and Dat, and drawing it down into the lower Sfirot. And also, there's a deep connection between the 13 Midot HaRachamim and the 13 inner dimensions of the Sfirot. And the Sfirot also that's how God's energy and light comes into the world. So it's flowing like water. So that's the connection with water in Elul. On Rosh Hashanah, so we just explained it. I'm not going to go back over it. We just gave 6, 7, 8 different connections of why we go to a body of water for Tashlich. This is Rosh Hashanah. So obviously, water takes on a very, very important imagery, symbolism of Rosh Hashanah, as we saw. So now let's go to Yom Kippur. Many, many connections with water. First of all, there's a almost universal custom, a very unique custom, that Erev Yom Kippur, everyone goes to the mikvah. Women, men, children, I'm not talking about little babies, but in many communities, the mikvah opens the night before Yom Kippur for all the women to go. And during the day before Yom Kippur, mikvahs are packed. And there's no other time of the year that there's a minhag. It's not a halacha, a minhag. Everyone who can goes to the mikvah. Then we have in Musaf of Yom Kippur, we have what's called the avoda. The central piece of Musaf of Yom Kippur follows the service that the Kohen Gadol used to do in the temple, step by step. It's a very, very meaningful, profound, archetypal part of our prayers. And part of the avoda of the Kohen Gadol, he goes to the mikvah 5 times during the avoda. And it mentions it in the Machzor that between each part of the service, there are many, many parts of the service, the Kohen Gadol went to the mikvah. So obviously this becomes a very, very potent symbolic idea of the purification. And then we have that there's a certain verse from Yechezkel that is mentioned many, many, many times in Yom Kippur. And that is, Zarakti Aleichem Mayim Taharim. God says in the name of the prophet, I will pour upon you purifying waters. So here we are, we're dressed in white, and we are trying for atonement, purification, forgiveness. And in the prayers, over and over again, it says, God says, I will pour over you cleansing, purifying water. Now, obviously, when we read these verses, we're supposed to visualize it. It's like mamish happening, that we really don't just read these verses, but we feel them. We are affected by them. And then we get to Sukkot. Sukkot is all about water. The whole thing is about water. In the temple, every night was the ceremony called Simcha Beit Shoeva, where they would go down daily and they would draw water from the spring that it's still in what's called Ir David, below the old city of Jerusalem. That was the original water source of Jerusalem. And they would fill a vessel with water. They would bring it up to the temple, and all night long, literally all night long, for the days of Sukkot, there were these incredible celebrations with music and dancing. And it says in the Mishnah, anyone who never merited to see the joy of Simcha Beit Shoeva has never experienced true joy. So we can imagine how joyous this was. And then in the morning, they would pour the water on the altar, because the whole thing of Sukkot, at the end of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, we begin to we begin to mention, instead of praising God for causing dew to descend, he makes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. But the whole of Sukkot, we're building up to this. And in fact, one of the simple understandings of shaking lulav is it's like a rain dance. It's a prayer for rain. Because for almost all of Jewish history, Israel was totally dependent on the rain. It's only in the last 20 or 30 years that we have recycled water. What am I trying to think of? Water purification plants that are taking water from the Mediterranean, extracting the salt, and that's what the majority of Israelis are drinking now. So water, it's all about Sukkot. Everything about Sukkot is about water. And in fact, we said that the gematria of water is 90. With its kollel, it equals 91, equals Sukkah. So the whole thing of Sukkot, in fact, the 4 species we take also, it says clearly that all of them need a lot of water to grow, especially the what I call the water, the aravot. What's it in English? Someone chat me really quickly here. Willows, of course, willows. Water willows. They're called arvei nachal. They're called river willows. So all this has to do with Sukkot. We could get into it much deeper. And then we get to Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah is the 7th and final day of Sukkot. And that's where instead of making one circle, a kafa, around the shul, we make 7. And then at a certain point, we put down the 4 species, the arba meaning, and we take up 5 water willows. And at the end, we hit them on the ground 5 times. And with that is that's considered the end of the judgment. It's even a more final sealing than Ne'ilah and Yom Kippur. And the significance, it's the water willows that are the last things that we seal the judgment with, because it's connected to the need and the prayer for rain. Now, one last thing is that the word for rain, geshem, is the same root of the word in Hebrew for gashmiut, which is physicality. It's not just geshem, it's physical sustenance that we are praying for. And then, of course, the final thing is on Shmini Atzeret, Simchas Torah, where we stop saying who makes the dew to fall, and we begin saying who makes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. I'm going to end with a beautiful teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, because as you know, this is our last class till after the Chagim. Because the Chagim, everything falls out on Tuesdays. So this is our last class. But the Baal Shem said a beautiful thing. So on Simchas Torah, he went like this: Mashiva ruach umorid hageshem. So those around him thought he was making a physical gesture based on the words. Mashiva ruach means he makes the wind to blow. So that looks like making the wind to blow. Umorid hageshem, he makes the rain come down. But the Baal Shem explained, no, I meant something different. And it's a little bit funny, but he has a deep point here. He went like this: enough of this ruchniut. Now I have to explain, the word for spirituality comes from the same word as wind. So instead of reading it, he makes the wind to blow. The Baal Shem Tov says, enough of this spirituality. It's time to make it all real, physical, material in our lives. That's one of my favorite Torahs. It's one of my favorite Torahs, because what he's saying is, we've been davening Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the Slichot, Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah, Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeret, all the Hakafot. He said, enough of this ruchnius. It's time that everyone take all of this and make it happen. Make it real. Now. What a great way to end the Chagim. So I just want to bless everyone. We've been talking about water. I just want to bless everyone that our lives flow like living waters, that our prayers and these holidays purify us, and they grant us with forgiveness from God. We have to forgive ourselves. We have to forgive other people, that other people should forgive us, that God should forgive us, that we should forgive God, and everything should flow. Everything should flow like water. And it should be a good year for all of us, all of Israel, and the entire world.